A reporter sits down across from an 80-year-old man in a Chicago apartment and asks him if he regrets anything. The man thinks about it. 40 years of cons, hundreds of marks, millions of dollars, banks, brokers, wealthy widows, businessmen, a few people who probably deserved it, but a lot more who didn't. The old man leans back and says, "I never cheated an honest man, only rascals." Then he smiles, because to Joseph Weil, the yellow kid, that wasn't a rationalization, that was a philosophy. And the reason it's worth taking seriously, the reason it's not just the self-serving nonsense of an old criminal, is that he understood something about human nature that most people who study cons still get wrong. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what it was, and you're not going to be at least a little uncomfortable about it. Thank you for tuning in, guys. I'm Johnny Diggs. Let's dig into this. Most con artists operate in the shadows. Fake names, fake faces, keep moving, keep quiet, stay out of the press. The yellow kid did the exact opposite. He gave interviews. He let newspapers write profiles of him while he was actively running cons. He walked into courtrooms, charmed juries, and walked back out. He wrote his memoir at 75 and named names. If you want to understand how a con operates at the professional level, not a one-off like Lustig or McGregor, but a 40-year career, Weil is the case study because he ran every single kind. Short cons, long cons, stock schemes, fake races, fake fights, fake oil wells, and he never once did stop. Weil grew up in Chicago in the 1880s. Working class family, sharp mind, zero patience for honest work. By his teens, he was running street hustles. By his 20s, he had graduated to the schemes that would define his career. The nickname came from a comic strip character, the Yellow Kid, a street-smart, mischievous kid from the slums who always seemed to come out ahead. Someone hung it on Weil early, and it stuck. What also stuck was his core operating theory, which he could articulate with remarkable clarity. The desire to get something for nothing is the downfall of most of mankind. He didn't say that as a warning. He said it as a business plan. Every con the yellow kid ever ran was built on the same foundation. Find someone who wants to get something for nothing, a sure thing, an inside edge, a deal that seems too good to pass up, and make that desire do all the work. He didn't have to create greed. Greed was already there. All he had to do was aim it. I want to spend some time on the mechanics here, because the yellow kid wasn't just prolific, he was technically gifted, and the specific technique he helped popularize is still the backbone of every major fraud you'll read about in a business school case study. It's called the long con, and if you think you already know what that means, stay with me, because the part most people miss is what makes it actually work. The short con is fast. Pick a stranger, exploit a moment of confusion or greed, take the money, and then disappear. Pigeon drop, 3-card Monty. It's over in minutes. The long con, though, is different. It takes weeks, sometimes even months. Weil's signature move was something grifters called the wire. He would rent a vacant storefront, fill it with furniture and props and hired actors, and dress it up as a fully operational telegraph office. Then, he and a partner would find a wealthy mark and work them into a position where they believed they had access to race results before they were transmitted to bookmakers. In other words, a guaranteed bet, a sure thing. The mark wasn't being tricked into something he didn't want. He was being offered the thing he already wanted most. By the time the fake office was set up and the mark was placing his bet, he had spent weeks building a relationship with Weil, who he knew as a well-connected businessman with access to information the average person just couldn't get. He trusted Weil. He liked Weil. In some cases, he considered Weil a friend. The entire fake office, the furniture, the actors, the ticker tape was just texture on top of a relationship that had already been built. The mark would put in his money. The bet would lose, by design. And then Joseph Weil's partner, playing the bookmaker, would suddenly reveal that the mark had technically violated some house rule, and that they'd have to leave immediately. like right now. No time to process, no time to ask questions, just take your coat, sir. We have to go now. By the time the Mark figured out what had happened, if he ever did, Joseph Weil was already making across town with a new storefront and a new mark. The long con isn't about speed. It's about building something so real feeling that the mark never looks for the same until it's far too late. Now here's the part of this file that I find genuinely uncomfortable, because it's the part where Joseph Weil isn't entirely wrong, and I need you to sit with that for a second before I explain it. Actually, guys, if you're watching this channel for the first time or just haven't already, my team and I would really appreciate it if you like this video and just hit the subscribe button. It helps the channel out an absolute ton. Every episode, I dig up a new file, a con, a fraud, a scheme, and pull it apart until you understand not just what happened, but why it kept working. We don't skip that part here. Anyway, Weil had a strict operating principle. He would only run a con on someone who was themselves trying to do something dishonest. The wire only worked because the mark believed he was getting access to insider information, which would be, in a real version of this, illegal. He wasn't being offered an investment. He was being offered a way to cheat a bookmaker. Joseph said this plainly: "I never picked an innocent man." And the uncomfortable truth is that, in most of the documented cases at least, he was right. His marks were businessmen trying to get an illegal edge, wealthy men trying to fix a race, people who arrived at the con already looking for something they shouldn't have. That doesn't make what he did legal, though. It doesn't make it okay either, but it does complicate the story. Because one of the reasons the yellow kid was so difficult to prosecute, one of the reasons juries kept letting him walk, is that his victims had a problem. Reporting the crime meant explaining, in a courtroom, that they had tried to use stolen telegraph wire information to beat a bookmaker. Does that sound familiar? It's the same lock Lustig used with the bribe in our previous episode, the same exact architecture. You don't just take the money, you take it in a way that makes the victim unable, or at least unwilling, to tell anyone what even happened. Joseph didn't stumble into this. He engineered it, deliberately, every single time. He was arrested over 100 times over his career. He served a handful of short prison sentences. For the most part, though, he absolutely walked. By the 1930s and 40s, the yellow kid had done something that almost no con artist in history has managed. He became famous. Openly, publicly famous, under his real name, while still actively running cons. Newspapers ran profiles. He became a Chicago institution, this dapper, silver-tongued elder statesman of the underworld who would sit down for an interview between his own schemes. He didn't even hide it. He discussed technique. He analyzed psychology. He critiqued other con men's work like a craftsman reviewing apprentice carpentry. At 75, he dictated his memoir to a journalist, a book called Con Man, a master swindler's own story, and it named the schemes, described the victims, and explained the methods in very much great detail. The crazy part, he was not prosecuted for it either, because by then, the statute of limitations had run out on most of it, and because honestly, the public kind of loved him. Joseph lived to be 100 years old. Think about that for a moment. He was born in 1875 and he died in 1976. He lived long enough to see the moon landing, long enough to see the kind of financial fraud he pioneered move onto computers. He spent those last years being interviewed by academics. He was cited in criminology textbooks. The FBI, they studied his methods. He thought that was hilarious. Every time I close a file, I ask the same question. Why did it work? Well, with Joseph Weil, the answer is messier than it was with Lustig or McGregor that we studied in previous episodes, because Joseph Weil didn't just exploit trust or information gaps. He exploited something most people don't want to acknowledge in themselves. Greed is the obvious one. He found people who wanted something they shouldn't have and handed it to them anyway. That part's easy to understand, and easy to feel superior about sitting here watching a YouTube video about it. But complicity is the thing that made it bulletproof. By designing every con so the mark was also doing something wrong, or at least believed they were, he ensured that the only person in the room with a clean conscience when it was over was him. And that flips the usual script. We talk about con victims as innocents. Most of the time, they actually are. But Joseph Weil specifically chose people who weren't, and spent a century making the argument that this wasn't crime so much as it was consequence. The desire to get something for nothing is the downfall of most of mankind. He wasn't wrong about the mechanism. He was just wrong. Well, very wrong. That made it what he did okay. The thing about Joseph's philosophy is that it lets him sleep at night, and it lets his victims stay quiet, which means, that's right, the con, it keeps running long after the yellow kid is gone, because the desire to get something for nothing, that didn't die with just him. Joseph built his whole career on the idea that the mark's own desire does most of the work. You just have to find it and point it at something. Now here's where it gets interesting. Every con man we've looked at so far actually committed the crimes they're famous for. In previous episodes, Lustig sold a tower. McGregor, he built a fake country. Joseph Weil, he ran wire schemes for 40 years. But for the next episode, the next one is about a man who became world famous for cons he may never have even actually committed. His name? Frank Abagnale from Catch Me If You Can. He was a pilot, a doctor, the lawyer, the years of running from the FBI. Here's the thing. A 2020 investigation found almost none of it actually even checks out. The FBI records don't match his story. The prisons, they have no record of him. The people he claims to have deceived can't even remember him, which raises the question, if the autobiography is the con, who even is the real Mark? Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm Johnny Diggs. Let's keep digging.